beneficial they are, both as pollinators and also as food for many other organisms. We are learning that they're very tightly related to plant families, or sometimes even one plant species. And so, you know, we think about pollinators and we think about things like nectar or pollen, but they also need the pith of certain wildflower to put their egg into, or they need to, as a larval stage, as a caterpillar, feed on a certain shrub. So as the invasive plants push out the native plants, we're reducing the habitat for insects. I'm sure everyone has heard how insects are in a steep decline, and certainly invasive plants are not like the #1 reason, but they are a reason. And so we want to do what we can to help our insects, because they perform many beneficial services for us. And they're beautiful. So this is a photograph of a Luna moth, and this is probably a male with these very large feathered antennae. And they use that to find the females that are emitting a pheromone. The adults don't even feed. It's the larval stage that feeds on particular plants. But this is a large, beautiful insect. And if you're lucky enough to see one, it's a neat treat. So what can we do about these plants? I've outlined kind of a 5-step process. So 5 steps and then repeat. Because most of the time when we're talking about managing invasive plants, we're talking about a long-term strategy. So the first thing that we have to do is prevent new introductions. And so what does that mean? It really means using caution when stuff gets moved. So we move a lot of material around, and this could include, unfortunately, seeds or fragments of invasive plants. So for example, on equipment like mowing equipment, if you have a landscaping service that might come to your property, or on equipment like a skidder that might come to your property, seeds and fragments can be stuck in the mud, in the wheel wells, in the little nooks and crannies behind the seat, all kinds of spaces where that material can unfortunately hitchhike. Also, obviously, ornamental plants. The top middle photograph is showing ornamental plants being grown out, and that's a source of introductions, obviously. In the top right, you see a photograph of a hiker with their pet. And we, in our boots or by having seeds attached to our pets, can accidentally transport invasive plants. On the bottom left, you're seeing a load of hay or straw. And that could have contamination from seeds. Same thing with manure or mulch. So I definitely have reports of people calling me and saying, oh, you know, I got this great load of compost, and then wouldn't you, or maybe not compost, but manure. I got this great load of manure and I spread it all around, and next thing you know, I've got name your invasive plant. So that can be a concern. And on the bottom right, you're seeing 2 potential ways that invasive plants move. #1 is through gravel. So here is a culvert that probably was recently replaced, and they've had to bring in material to build up the road surface. And so that material can be a source of infestations. Also water. So water moves a lot of plant fragments or seeds around. We can't, and you know, it's probably not a good idea to try to control how water moves, but if you have a moving water course on your property, it's just something to keep an eye on and be aware that floods can bring a lot of plant material and cause new infestations. So just something to be aware of. So when we talk about prevention, it's both very intentional actions like trying to buy native plants for gardening and landscaping, and perhaps asking your logger to clean their equipment before they bring it to your property, but also keeping an eye on our own movements. We can, you know, knock the mud off our boots before we leave the natural area where we went for a hike, that kind of thing. And also just keeping an eye on sites where you've had work done. So, you know, if you do get the road redone and you have gravel, just keep an eye on it and notice when you're seeing new plant growth and check it out. In terms of, you know, your existing properties, the next step in the process is really to know what you have, to identify any invasive plants that are present. So we're going to spend a little time looking at specific plants. I've chosen 9 invasive plants that are common in terms of forest environments in Maine and widespread. So the first is Asiatic bittersweet vine. This is a woody vine that has sort of a oval or a round leaf with small teeth along the edges of the leaf that you can see in the lower left hand. The fruit are very colorful, and Martha Stewart taught everybody how to make bittersweet wreaths, which was really a bad idea. And because when you throw that out in the back 40, all of a sudden you've got a terrible bittersweet infestation. You can see here the vines can grow very large. I've seen vines, you know, maybe 10 inches in diameter, and they can kill mature trees. In the fall, the coloration is distinctive. It's a yellow color and very distinctive if you can see it from a distance. And these are alternate along the twig. So we think of plants as being opposite, the leaves opposite one another, or alternate along the stem. Or sometimes, you know, many leaves from one point, but that's a way that we talk about how to identify plants. It can be a shade tolerant species. So this is a bird dispersed plant. The bird can consume the fruit, travel into the forest, defecate, the seed gets to the forest floor, and even under a shaded canopy, that plant can grow and slowly make its way, twisting around the trees and get up to the canopy and then explode and become a thick, strong vine and fruit. So it won't be quite as devastating as, you know, this photograph on the right, which looks like it's in a more open environment, but over time it can be very damaging. A truly shade tolerant plant is burning bush. So this is an ornamental that escapes. It's also sometimes called winged euonymus, and this one has opposite branching leaves right across from each other. And this one can get established right in the forest understory. It's quite shade tolerant. It turns bright red in the fall, and it has these corky wings along the twig that you're seeing in the top left photo. And that's quite distinctive on larger twigs, not usually on this year's growth, but on last year's growth and the year before, etc. It has kind of an inconspicuous little white-green flower that you can see in the lower left there, but the flowers are not particularly showy. And yesterday I went for a walk at one of my favorite nature preserves here in the greater Portland area down by the Presumpscot River. And there are unfortunately several different species of invasive plants. This burning bush was right outside the trailhead, and I realized that some of these pictures you're going to be like, oh my gosh, Nancy, really? You can identify that. And it's not the same as if you're there. But here on the right is a close-up showing you the green color of this young burning bush. And if I click my mouse again, here is a close-up of the twig showing those winged edges and the little buds. Here's two buds across the twig from each other. So that's kind of a look at what burning bush is looking like right now in the landscape. I thought it would be fun just to show a couple pictures of right now, because most of my pictures are from the summer, obviously. Another shade-tolerant invasive plant is common buckthorn. This is a shrub, or it can grow as a single-stemmed tree, small tree in rich soils. Mostly we see it as a shrub, meaning many stems from a base like this on the lower right. Common buckthorn has these juicy black fruits, which are quite conspicuous. When present, they have oval-shaped leaf with tiny serrations or teeth on the edge of the leaf. And the leaves of common buckthorn tend to be almost opposite from each other. So they're very variable. Sometimes they're clearly alternate. Sometimes they are subopposite. Sometimes they look opposite. They're a little bit variable. And if you take your penknife and scratch at the bark of a common buckthorn stem that's maybe like 2 inches or so in diameter, you'll see this orange coloration below the bark, which is distinctive. This is a plant which can grow in the shade and come to be abundant in the forest understory. It prefers slightly enriched soils, so more nutrient-rich, kind of finer soils. So I often find it around farms, because of course farms were placed where the soil was good, because people could tell that. So if you've got some really rich soils on your property that are growing fantastic sugar maples, check that out. Make sure you're not also growing common buckthorn. The cousin of the common buckthorn is the glossy buckthorn, or glossy false buckthorn. Oh, and I should say, These are not thorny plants. So I'm gonna go back to the common buckthorn, and you'll notice there are no conspicuous thorns here. There is at the very tip of the twig, very, very tip, a very, very tiny spine, which is maybe 1/3 of an inch, and it cannot pierce the skin. It's flexible, so they're not thorny plants. I don't know why they were named this way. But glossy buckthorn has a different leaf shape. So glossy buckthorn leaves are more elliptical, and they do not have teeth at the edges. They have a more straight leaf veination that goes pretty directly to the margin or edge of the leaf, as opposed to the common buckthorn where the veins curve in a bit more toward the tip. Glossy buckthorn also has very clearly alternate leaf arrangement. So you won't find it opposite or subopposite, it's clearly alternate. Another distinctive character of glossy buckthorn is that it can have both red and black fruit on the same plant at the same time. So in the top right, you're seeing an example of that. Most plants ripen their fruit all at once, and this plant can ripen fruit asynchronously or out of sync. Glossy buckthorn is our most shade tolerant invasive plant. It is also tolerant of wet feet. So this plant will grow very happily in a peatland. We are seeing a horrible dense infestation on the lower right of glossy buckthorn seedlings in a peat moss area. But it will also grow happily in a dry field or at the edge of a forest. It's very, it's a generalist. It can grow almost anywhere, but it's very shade tolerant. I've actually found glossy buckthorn in hemlock forests, which is normally a habitat that is not penetrated by invasive plants. And I'm not sure if that's the dense shade or the acidity of the soil or both, but glossy buckthorn is like, keep me up at night kind of invasive plant in Maine because it can penetrate so many kinds of forests. Japanese barberry is another ornamental escape, which can form dense thickets in the understory, as you're seeing on the top right here. This is a very thorny plant. It has barbs all along the stem, which you'll see in a minute. In the fall, it produces a red tic-tac-like fruit that hangs below the stem. They can be very large. This is my colleague Justin in the lower left, and he's a little taller than me. I'm 5'5", and he's probably 5'9". And you'll see these shrubs are almost as tall as he is. So they can be very large and very dense. And these dense thickets can harbor large numbers of ticks. They think that the thickets create a humid environment and that is beneficial for the ticks' survival. They also think that the mice probably like the cover that the shrubs provide, but it seemed to be more correlated with the environmental variables like humidity. So no one wants more ticks on their property. So this is a great reason to get rid of Japanese barberry. And I sometimes have folks say, well, I have a hedge of barberry or I have a hedge of burning bush and it doesn't sprout in my yard. I don't have a problem. I don't think it's escaping. But I can tell you that, if you're mowing the whole area around that shrub, you're not likely going to see the problem. Birds carry the fruits of these species into natural areas. And so you might not see the problem in your particular yard area, but they can be exported to other places. So that's my line there. So here's what Japanese barberry looks like right now. Again, it's a shrub with many canes or stems from the base. And this is kind of an arching shrub. The canes come up and then they kind of fall over. You're seeing in this photograph on the bottom left with my palm that the spines or thorns of the barberry along the twigs. The barberry has leaves clustered, at nodes along the stem, alternate along the stem. So there will be a number of leaves from each of these nodes. An interesting fact about barberry is that the interior is this bright yellow color, both of the stems, larger stems, and also of the roots. And so when you're sawing and cutting and pulling, you can be very confident that you have the right plant when you're down there in the thickets and everything is terrible. So that's what Japanese barberry is looking like right now. It's starting to show a little bit of green, at least here in Portland. Japanese knotweed is another terrible invasive plant. This is technically an herb, which means it dies. It's not woody per se. It dies back to the ground every year as opposed to having a long-lived above ground stem. It has long-lived roots though, and this plant can, as I said, become a significant problem in floodplains and riversides and stream environments. It's sometimes called bamboo because the stems have these very kind of swollen joints along the stem that you're seeing at the bottom left here. There's all kinds of websites about eating invasive species, and apparently you can use the tender first shoots of Japanese knotweed for knotweed rhubarb pie and various other things. You can saute it with butter and lemon. Everything tastes great with butter and lemon. But it can be a real dense, horrible, very difficult to treat problem. And this is a plant that, and so I'll tell you a bit more, the leaves of this plant are alternate along the stem. They are sort of halberd shaped, so flat at the base, and then they kind of come to a point. What else? The flowers are late in the summer, and they can attract a number of bees and other insects because they're rich in nectar. So, you know, some people, beekeepers, sometimes like to have Japanese knotweed because it can be a good source of forage. But boy, if we had native plants in its place, that would also be a good source of forage, and it would be a more mixed habitat for other species. I don't think I have a slide of Japanese knotweed right now, but the stems persist, and they're sort of a reddish color at this time, and brittle and dead. Multiflora rose is another shrub. This one has an interesting history. It was used as a grafting rootstock for various types of ornamental roses. And maybe the rose that was grafted to the multiflora wasn't as hardy, and so it had, maybe in a cold winter it died, but the rootstock persisted. And so people who never thought they purchased a multiflora rose, all of a sudden they had a multiflora rose because it was used as a grafting rootstock because it was so hardy and so, you know, able to resist. And so that's the terrible story of how we got so much multiflora rose. It's a white flowering rose, kind of in the mid-June timeframe. It can form a dense thicket. It's very, very thorny, very unpleasant to work with. And it starts to climb. So I've seen many instances of multiflora 10, 15, even 25 feet in the, up into the low branches of trees and shrubs. These gentlemen are probably wondering, why did we go in here? This picture was not worth it because their clothes are ripped to pieces by the thorns. Multiflora, meaning many flowers clustered at the tips, leads to this pattern of fruit that you're seeing in the top right with multiple fruits clustered at the end of the twig. The fruits are small. They're about 1/3 of an inch in diameter, so a small rose hip. And you can identify multiflora rose when you can find a leaf, because I've circled in red the comb-like fringed stipule. So I don't use too many botanical words, but this is kind of inevitable. This structure at the base of a rose leaf is called a stipule. And multiflora rose is the only one that has, in Maine, that has a fringe stipule. It's the only one that I know of that has a fringe stipule, but there's probably some rose somewhere in the world that has it. But in Maine, this is a clue that this is conclusive evidence that you have a multiflora rose if it has this fringed stipule at the base of the compound leaf. So multiflora rose has a compound leaf, just like a raspberry or a blackberry. And the leaflets are opposite each other along the axis of the leaf. I'm gonna take a sip of water. Here is a photograph at the top of the very aggressive thorns of the multiflora rose. And at the bottom is just a shot of a sprawling rose bush with one of my gloves stuck to it. No real leaf out yet on the multiflora, but the buds have broken and they're starting to swell. Norway maple is a very shade tolerant ornamental maple that was planted as a street tree in many places. A good way to distinguish Norway maple on a mature tree is the bark. It looks like a dark ash. It's very furrowed. as opposed to our native maples, which have a more platy, shaggy bark as they mature. The fruit also has a wider angle than our native maples. In the Samara, it's a wider angle as opposed to a narrower angle. And the leaf is kind of loby. Norway maple was bred in a variety of colors. So there's the Crimson King, which is a kind of a purplish leaf that's purple all year round. And there are other varieties. So the sort of pure native form has a green leaf, but there are many varieties. A good way to tell Norway maple from our native maples in the growing season is to break the leaf stalk or petiole, and there's a white latexy sap. Even if you break the leaf itself, there's a white latexy sap. In a drought, this is not as reliable, so just be aware. But another character you can use in the late summer and fall and winter is the buds. So the buds of a Norway maple are kind of reddish green and they're fairly rounded, whereas a sugar maple has a pointy brown bud with many scales on it. And the Norway maple's buds are sort of greenish, reddish, and only have a few scales or little coverings. So this is a very shade tolerant tree, and the seeds can be carried into the forest by wind or by animals. Shrubby honeysuckles, I've shown you many pictures of these. These are shade tolerant shrubs. They can be very large. They have sort of irregular, leggy sort of fruit in the spring. It does have a very scented odor. The hollow stem pith is useful to tell our invasive species have a hollow stem, whereas we do have a couple of native honeysuckles and they have a solid pith, or that the very center of the twig is solid as opposed to hollow like this. So that's a good character for the shrubby honeysuckles. The leaves on shrubby honeysuckles are opposite one another, and they tend to be fairly hairy. And the fruit are fleshy berry that's a bird dispersed fruit. The shrubby honeysuckles in Portland are just starting to leaf out. As I mentioned and showed in photographs, this is a species that puts its leaves out early. On my commute to Augusta, I get off the highway at the exit for 201 for Richmond and Gardner. And right as you kind of come off the highway and you look into the woods on either side of the road, you can just see the shrubby honeysuckle. So in May, I'm like, I don't want to look at this right now. You can really tell when the shrubby honeysuckle is leafing out. So that was our 9 sort of top most common and I would say most threatening invasive plants of forests in Maine. This is a tree which is invasive, which is not common in Maine at all. And I'm telling you about it tonight because it is a host for a very destructive insect pest. So I'll tell you about the tree first, and then I'll show you the insect. This is a large tree. It can grow to be a canopy-sized tree. It was an ornamental species. It is known from the book A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. It's a very shade pollution tolerant tree. It can survive in the cracks in sidewalks and be greenery where many other plants cannot. So in literature, obviously that's a redeeming quality, but in our natural areas, it's not a good thing. So this tree has alternate pinnately compound, pinna like feather. So leaflets opposite one another along the leaf axis. So, gosh, sorry. I'm a morning person and I've been blah, 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 blah for too many minutes right in a row. This is a pinnately compound leaf, which is very large. So these leaves are between 1 and 3 feet long. So in this photograph in the top right, you're looking at this whole thing is a leaf. I think you can see my mouse, and this whole thing is a leaf, etc. These trees have separate sexes. So most plants have both male and female within the same flower. Some plants have separate male and female flowers on different parts of the plant. This species has separate male and female plants. And so these trees that you're seeing in these photographs are all female. They're producing fruit, but that can be distinctive and might help you recognize it. The fruit that you can see in the lower right look a little bit like the fruit of an elm or maybe an ash. They're sort of a flat They're not fleshy at all. They're sort of flat with a seed in the middle. And so here's the insect that can use tree of heaven as a host. It's called spotted lanternfly. And this is a very bad pest for apples and grapes, as well as a suite of other small fruits. So we don't have this insect here, but it is in the mid-Atlantic, sort of, Maryland, Delaware, parts of Pennsylvania, New York has had a report. Very concerning insect, and it uses tree of heaven as a host plant. So this is a piercing sucking insect that has a mouth part that it can poke into the tree or plant and suck out the juices, and so it causes a lot of harm. And they thought at one time that it required a meal from tree of heaven in order to reproduce. They don't think it's quite that tight, but tree of heaven is a preferred host. And so we're looking for tree of heaven in Maine. It wasn't ornamental. There might be some around. We know a couple locations in southern Maine, York County. If you think you know where this plant is in Maine, please report locations to me or to IMAP Invasives, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. We're reaching out to landowners to ask if they would either consider removing the trees or because it's an invasive tree and could host this insect, or if they would be willing to participate in a trap tree program with the Maine Forest Service, where they use the tree, they wound it, and then they use it as a test site to look for the insect repeatedly because the insect is drawn to the tree when it's under stress. So if you think you might know where some of these are, report that to me. If you want to learn more about the insect, I've got a link in the slide. Okay, so a resource for identification is our Maine Invasive Plants Field Guide. And I think Jen is going to put a link to where you can purchase this on the Maine Woodland Owners website. But this is a ring-bound field guide that opens vertically, and it has a page for each plant. And you can see there it's got essential identification and control information. There are 46 species here. So this is a great resource for identification, and you can carry it with you into the woods. It fits in kind of a Carhartt-sized pocket, and it's waterproof. So this is a great resource for identification. You can find it again on the Maine Woodland Owners website, on the Natural Areas Program website, and then, COVID-19 permitting, at a few bookstores around southern Maine. Once you know what plants you have, it's essential to know how many you have, where they are, and what species. And we are asking you also, if you can, to report what you have so that we can all learn more. So the tool for that is this online mapping tool called IMAP Invasives. It's our central repository, and it can help you map your land. It's free and helps us all understand the distribution. We welcome your data. You can visit imapinvasives.org to get an account and learn more. This is an example of a property level mapping. So this previous image is showing you a very zoomed out view, but this is what it looks like when you actually go and map a property. This is the State of Maine Pinelands property in New Gloucester. And this is work that I did and my team. And it shows in green the areas of infestation on this property. So it's helpful for management to know kind of the extent of the infestation and where it is. Right now, in terms of assessing your property, we have free invasive plant management plans available for farms and woodlots in 5 counties. And so this is offered through the local soil and water conservation district. It's a limited time project, and you can contact your local soil and water district to sign up. There is a flyer with contact information at the Natural Areas Program website. And again, this is for properties in Knox, Lincoln, Kennebec, Waldo, and Somerset counties. This is just an example of a species-specific map that would be presented as part of the management plan. And again, Jen will send this presentation, so you'll have access directly to this link. But if you search for Maine Natural Areas Program invasive plants, you'll come to our homepage, and you should be able to find the flyer from there also. Once you know what you have, then you have to prioritize what you're going to do. We can't usually do everything everywhere. So we recommend prioritizing special habitats. Maybe you've got some lovely floodplain forest, or you've got some very nice wildlife habitat, or you've got some exceptionally valuable timber stands. Also, good things to prioritize are eradication of new species that have just arrived on your property, because you can nip it in the bud and get a good return on investment. Same thing with eradication of isolated populations. So if you have a lot of shrubby honeysuckle up by the road, but only a couple plants back in the forest, go get those plants back in the forest. You know, if you have time, then go ahead and suppress the bad infestation of honeysuckle by the road and try to contain it. But start first with those outlying infestations so that they don't get a foothold. So that's a little bit about prioritizing. Let's see here. Okay, click, there we go. And I just want to say that in terms of prioritizing and setting goals, eradication is not the only good goal. So even if you're like, oh gosh, Nancy, I've got so much Asiatic bittersweet, I'll never be able to get rid of it, you can still achieve important goals. So for example, you can stop the vines from killing trees. You can, same thing with, you know, honeysuckle in an understory. Even if you can't eradicate it, you can maybe stop it from spreading into the next stand. So you don't have to feel like you have to get rid of every single invasive plant in order to have a good benefit. So just want to say that. Okay, and next we get into actually controlling plants, going out and trying to kill some plants. And then we have to monitor what we've done, and then we repeat. So there are many methods for controlling invasive plants. Some of them involve these sorts of non-herbicide methods, like mechanically with hand tools, or smothering, or animals like goats, flame weeding, the baggie method, in which there's a very enterprising young man who has these very thick, sort of contractor weight, small plastic bags, and you put them over a cut stem and you zip tie it, and it prevents light from stimulating the resprouting, and so it helps you to kill the plant. Classical biocontrols are insects that go through a very rigorous testing process and are reared and then released to control the plant. We don't really have a lot of options there right now. Combinations of these, and there's probably more that I haven't thought of. And I'd like to just say that, you know, repeating your method and using combinations, these are great techniques, so you wouldn't have to limit yourself to one or the other. I've seen some very creative combination treatments. And then, you know, we do also have as a tool herbicide. I do use herbicide in control of invasive plants on state of Maine properties. That's me in the top right with my backpack sprayer. This is another tool in the toolkit. It's not always the right tool, but there are cases where it can be effective and it can be used safely. So this obviously is up to the landowner. Landowners in Maine do have the ability to treat on their own properties with herbicide when following all of the label instructions and rules. The label is the law, so you have to read the label on the herbicide very carefully and make sure that you're protecting yourself and protecting the environment. So there are different methods of using herbicide. You might mostly think about a foliar, like that's maybe the thing that comes to mind is sprays. But you can also, and that can be a very good method, and you're using typically a very low concentration of the active ingredient, but you can also do a basal bark spray where you're spraying the lower 12 to 18 inches of a larger woody plant, or a cut stem or cut stump treatment, where you're treating just the outer layer of cambium when you cut the plant. That has to be done pretty much right away after the cut. You can't cut yesterday and then come along today. It has to be done immediately. And so you can use these in combination with mechanical treatment very creatively to help you address invasive plants. I have to click here, okay. Invasive plant disposal. So someone specifically asked about this. What do I do with all this stuff? So it really depends. Ideally, you leave it on site, if at all possible. So on the right-hand side there, you're seeing one of our interns, Sean. He's piling these ornamental jewelweed, which is kind of a wetland plant, in the area where we are pulling them. If the plants, you know, if you can find a place on your property where you can simply pile the plants up off the ground, or if they're individual plants in the woods, I often pull, when I'm pulling, I turn it upside down and I hang it by the roots in a tree. So those are some thoughts. Leaving it on site reduces problems associated with transport. So we don't want to, you know, move the problem around. If it has fruit or seeds, you could, you know, remove those, cut those into a bag for disposal in the trash. You can burn in some invasive plant material according to, following all local rules and regulations for fire. There are multiple considerations. So these are the kinds of things that I think about when I think about disposal. The reality is that in some sites, you've already got a seed bank in the soil. And so leaving the material right there in the woods may not be that bad, even if it has seeds. If it's going to present a major problem, if you're going to have to drag it through clean areas that are not infested in order to get it out, then I would just leave it. And you're going to have to come back and monitor for growth anyway. Much of this stuff, if you pile it and leave it and it's dry, it's not going to be viable. So if you're concerned about root fragments, or like with Japanese knotweed, that's a plant that's notorious for sprouting from the cut pieces of stem. If it can be put out to dry, raised up from the ground, then it can become really dead, dried out, snap it, dead. Then you can dispose of it in the compost or what have you. So those are some thoughts about disposal. I wanted to say that the invasive plant field guide has information about control. And so while, it's a field guide and so the space was limited, that's a great place to go for like what techniques are effective. We also have this invasive plant gallery and fact sheets on our website, and we had more space on the website than in the field guide. So we have links to some video demonstrations, and in some cases we have more photographs. So this is another place to look. And then some other resources as you consider what you might do to control invasive plants. We have a list of licensed invasive plant control professionals, licensed meaning licensed to use herbicides as part of their business. And this is maintained by the Board of Pesticide Control. And there's this link here. And so it says, where their business is located, what areas they serve, etc. The Natural Areas Program also maintains a list of non-herbicide or herbicide plus invasive plant control professionals. And so, these are folks who offer a variety of methods, perhaps herbicide, but perhaps not. And so this is on the Natural Areas Program website. And anyone who knows someone who has a business, you could contact us to get listed on this list. For the prior list, this is maintained by the Board of Pesticide Control because they verify the licensure. I'm just looking at my watch and seeing that it's already 8 o'clock. I've got just 2 more slides. So I'm very excited about a new project that's coming soon. Just last week with colleagues at the Maine Forest Service, we learned that the US Forest Service has funded us to do a project which includes putting on an invasive plant academy for natural resource professionals like foresters and soil and water conservation district staff and wildlife biologists, etc. So that's going to be in spring 2021, again, COVID-19 permitting. And we'll also have cost share funding to get more invasive plant management plans prepared for family forests. And there will be funding to implement treatments. So this is something that we're very excited about. And the Invasive Plant Academy will have hopefully both indoor and outdoor sessions. So that's my slides. I realize we're at our time. However, if folks have questions, I'm happy to stick around and take those. I don't see a lot of questions in the chat. So if anyone has a question, they can write it now into the chat. You're certainly welcome to contact me directly. My email and phone are here. Or Jen, if you want to unmute people, I don't know if you have a raise your hand option, but
there is one. I can't see it on my end, but I will unmute everyone, and anyone wants to jump in with a question for Nancy, that'd be great. Nancy, we didn't have a very cold winter, and the spring is going to be, I heard it's going to be warm. Is that going to affect what we're going to see for invasives this year?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think that it should affect it that much just in terms of this year. I do think changes over time with climate change are impacting invasive plants that can come into Maine and persist. So that's something that I'm keeping an eye on, knowing that, plants that perhaps have been limited and kept out of Maine because of our cold winters are perhaps able to get a foothold now. So I don't know, does that answer your question, Jen?
Yeah, I mean, I know there's a lot of factors that make
Jen, we're losing your audio a little bit. I think I don't have Jen's audio right now, so I'm going to turn to a couple of the questions that are in the chat. Someone asked about sumac. So staghorn sumac is a native plant in Maine. I know that many people find it unattractive, or they don't want it on their properties, but it's not invasive. Any plant that's growing where you don't want it is a weed, and obviously you can take action, but it does produce fruit that is consumed by wildlife, and I know that some natural foragers use the seeds to make a tea. So anyway, that's not by our definition an invasive plant. It can grow in a dense stand, obviously, but it does have natural enemies and that kind of thing. And then blue lettuce, we have a bunch of non-native lettuce species in Maine, and I'm forgetting right now whether the blue lettuce is a native or a non-native, but they tend to be kind of early successional plants that come in a landing area, not shade tolerant. So we haven't had any of the lettuces become a major problem, except we do have a plant called wall lettuce, which is not, it's not in the same genus as many of the lactuca lettuces, but that plant is a problem. Yeah, and to answer your question, blue lettuce, not that I'm aware of, but there are some weedy lettuce-y plants.
Tom Doak's hand is up.
Okay.
So go ahead, Tom. Let me unmute him. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Tom.
Honeysuckle. I had a question about did you say that native honeysuckle are solid stem and the non-native are hollow? Is that?
That's correct, Tom. Yes, our native honeysuckles, they have a whitish colored pith. So the pith is kind of a spongy area in the center of the stem, whereas our invasive honeysuckles all have a hollow center. It's not always as dramatic as what I showed you in that photograph, but on a twig that's as big around as your pinky finger at least, you will see some kind of a hollow chamber in the invasive honeysuckles. And
so does that mean that the natives are not invasive? I mean,
correct.
By definition, correct? Kind of.
Correct.
But does that mean that essentially all the non-natives would be considered invasive? I mean, I know it's hard to tell. There's so many different non-native honeysuckles out there.
Yeah. So the non-native honeysuckles that we have in Maine that are invasive, there are 4 species for sure, well, 3 species and then a hybrid. There is a non-native honeysuckle that some people are promoting for a food crop, and I'm not a big fan of that. So yeah, the non-native Lonicera species are very vigorous, aggressive shrubs. The native honeysuckles that we have Canada honeysuckle, which is kind of an occasional plant in Maine. And then we have several rare species, which are wetland species, and they're found mostly in southern Maine. And so, most of us are never going to even encounter one of those. But there are some concerns, I don't think with the honeysuckles, but with some of the other invasive plants about hybridization between natives and non-natives. And so, yeah, I guess I'll stop there. So there's a question here from Ann Goslin. There's a rare but nasty invasive on my road. Sorry, that's a private question. Sorry, Anne, I'll get back to you on your question. But she also asks if Multiflora rose stems can reroot like Japanese knotweed, or can we leave the cut canes in a brush pile? I would say that if you're just cutting the canes, I don't believe that the Multiflora can reroot from cuttings. And I think if you put that in a brush pile, I think that's okay. Trust but verify. I would always keep an eye on what you've piled in the brush piles, but as far as I know, Multiflora cut things without roots cannot sprout.
There's another question, yeah.
So Mike has asked about fire management. Has fire management been done in Maine for any of the invasives you managed? Yes, not on a large scale, but I know of at least one individual who has used prescribed fire to try to control honeysuckle and buckthorn, and I think maybe barberry. And there was there was progress. So some of the smaller shrubs, I think, you know, the very smallest shrubs were killed. The larger shrubs did resprout. So I think, you know, perhaps prescribed fire could be used in combination with other treatments, or perhaps, you know, multiple applications would be required. So I think some of the larger shrubby plants, you know, if the fire's not really hot enough to kill all the cambium, then they can resprout. Any other questions?
So to reiterate, Nancy, you would be welcoming any questions. Oh, looks like we have one here from Anne. Did you already answer that one? Oh, there's a new one.
Yeah, so Anne asks, is there evolving information about the health of glyphosate on soil and fungal health? Yeah, so glyphosate is the herbicide that is the active ingredient in products like Roundup. What I understand is that glyphosate is a molecule that doesn't persist in soil, that is broken down fairly rapidly in the environment. We're always learning more about these products. And so currently, you know, these products are licensed by the EPA. There have been a lot of studies on these products. Again, I feel that herbicide is a tool that it's only one tool in the toolbox. I use a lot of mechanical control. We use the least amount of product possible. So I think that's what I want to say about that. I think that we have to weigh the risk of some of this product against the risk of our habitats being really damaged by these plants. So that's always something that I'm thinking about as I'm making decisions. I buy a lot of organic food, by the way, so I want to distinguish between the way that we use herbicides in a very targeted and selective way to control invasive plants, and the way that herbicides may be used in very large scale industrial agriculture, or even in a small scale. You know, if you're going out and you have a Roundup ready crop, it's a crop that is engineered to withstand the herbicide, and you're treating, you know, massive acres. That's just it's a totally different thing than the way that we use a targeted application of herbicide to control invasive plants. So I think, as I said, you know, I'm always sort of thinking about those risks and weighing them.
Great. I think that that might do it for questions for tonight. But Nancy, you did say you would take questions on email?
Please feel free to contact me via email or phone. That's my desk number, but it's forwarding right now to my cell phone. So please feel free to reach out. I know that right now is not a time when many people are identifying plants, but you can identify some of these invasive plants now if you take a little time. But as the things start to leaf out and plants start to show their colors, please feel free to send me your photographs. If you find something suspicious, let me know. I'm happy to help you try to figure out what it is.
Great.
And you're very welcome, everyone.
Yeah, and just to let everybody know, we are going to have we're going to have a couple more online events over the next couple weeks and into May. So we're going to continue doing this. Please check our website to find out all the different events. If you're a member, you're going to get an email with an update of what programs we have coming up, woodland management related, and planning for the future for your woodlot and all that. So we're very lucky with all the folks that are willing to present on our behalf as an organization. Thanks to everyone for attending, and look forward to having you back for our next events. Please visit our website, mainewoodlandowners.org, for information, and everybody have a safe and good night, and we'll hopefully see you soon. Thanks very much, Nancy, for your time. This was, we feel really lucky to have you as a person we can bring in and share knowledge with our members. So appreciate it.
Happy to do it.
Okay, everyone. Thanks again. We'll see everyone soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.